Greetings, imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I, of course, am your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, apparently not the masters of these doodles. And, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. And this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode 298. My God, has it. I can't even believe it. I'm still here. And you guys are still here. And these, of course, chats are still brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And Gilbert, you have to leave. See, he's going to bark. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and punch in PGS for this community, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you get 20% off of your order. Although I don't know if they can make it to your house by Christmas. So that's all I can tell you. So anything interesting happened today? Anything interesting going on? I'll just, I won't beat around the bush. As you can see, I'm wearing my Rise of Skywalker shirt that I received last night at the world famous Mann's Chinese Theater. It even says right on the sleeve, December 19th for showing. 6:00 last night. It was, I have to say, Carrie Fisher's brother was there doing presentations. People were dressed up. It was a very festive atmosphere, and I wanted to go there, and it was a fantastic milieu, and I really had a good time. These guys, you have to go, Gilbert. They know now that when I'm talking, they seem to come here because they think they can get me to give them things when they don't shut up. So anyway, it was a very festive atmosphere. And I have to say, I was very excited. I was very excited to see a Star Wars movie at the Chinese Theater on opening day. The first show, I'd never done that before. And of course, I've always thought of when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old, the Chinese Theater to me was always ground zero of Star Wars. I believe that's where it had its world premiere. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it did. So it was either going to my beloved Cinerama Dome or I was going to the Chinese Theater. No, Tallulah. No. And it was great. I was glad I went. I went with Bill Hunt and his brother and his lovely wife, Sarah. And, of course, Elizabeth. And we took Sophie. And it was very funny because we were, of course, people recognized us and people recognized Sophie because they had seen the video we all made at Comic-Con. So that was fun. That was cool. And it was really cool seeing that extended trailer, or I guess the prologue scene for Christopher Nolan's Tenet. And I have to tell you, I was quite excited seeing that. Again, beautifully made. It's very funny. Well, not very funny, but it's really nice to see a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan, who I think his work is unmistakable. It smacks of Christopher Nolan, which I think is a very good thing. He has a very stately, I guess stately is the word that came to mind, way of shooting things. It's very elegant. It's very smart. It's very effective. And the opening scene was incredibly intriguing. I don't quite understand what was all going on. I mean, I got the gist of it, but there was a lot of double crosses. And of course, the wacky backwards time effect was in evidence last night. But the film, I mean, talk about verisimilitude. What I love about Christopher Nolan is, as far as fantasy filmmakers go, he is peak verisimilitude. Christopher Nolan is always seeking peak verisimilitude. And you know that verisimilitude is my favorite thing. And to see it in that movie, it was great. Now, I'm going to tell you what I thought of The Rise of Skywalker. Now, for those, I'm not going to get really spoiler-ish, like about plot points, but I am going to talk about things maybe people don't want to know. And I might address certain issues. So I would suggest, if you're interested in being spoiler-free, to come back to this later after you've seen The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I'm just gonna start. So, as everyone knows, I am no fan of J.J. Abrams as a filmmaker. I've never met him as a man, but in terms of the things that he's made, I did not like Star Trek 09. I loathed Star Trek Into Darkness. I thought Super 8 was muddled. They couldn't even get the glass right. So when you saw the lens flares that he wanted to recreate, they were not the right lens flares. And I know that's a strange thing to say, but it's true. And I really did not like The Force Awakens. So, and I've kept up on all the leaks and all the talk and everything that's going on, and watched many other YouTubers and Fandom Menace channels that I'm actually a fan of the people from those channels. So I was very up on my Rise of Skywalker. But that said, as a lifelong Star Wars fan, no one's opinions are going to dissuade me from going to see a Star Wars movie. I'm excited. I'm inherently excited to see a Star Wars film. You know, even though I think there are fewer great Star Wars movies than there are not so great Star Wars movies, but that doesn't bother me. I still get excited. I like the universe. I like the Star Wars universe. I like to descend into that universe, however that universe presents itself. Mostly movies, but now with television and The Mandalorian, whether it's animation like the Clone Wars, whether it's video games like Shadows of the Empire or Battlefront or Fallen Order. I like the Star Wars universe. I just enjoy spending time there. Obviously, I've built a lot of model kits, and I've collected a lot of action figures and still do. So I love the Star Wars universe. So I go into everything Star Wars wanting to love it. It gives me no pleasure to not like something that is Star Wars, because I love Star Wars. Who doesn't love Star Wars? That said, my position on The Last Jedi, the last Star Wars film, here's one of the things that as everyone knows who's watched this channel for a long time, I love storytelling, and storytelling stories are the best way that we can convey human truths to one another through the experiences of whether they're fictional or characters that are based on actual real people. I do think that once something has become a story, once you're telling, say, the story of a historical event, whether it's from 50 years ago or 500 years ago, it might have been based on something that really happened, but you've contextualized it into a story, so it works on a number of different levels. You're not just conveying information, you're using metaphor, you're using alliteration, you're using all the kinds of things that storytellers who are telling completely made-up stories use. So I've always believed that whether your story is based on something that's really occurring or really occurred, a real person, for instance, or whether you're making it up out of whole cloth, all stories can have more or less truth in them. And the point is to make you believe in your story. And because I grew up loving genre material, science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, all of those things, it's always important to me, the best of those stories work when there is verisimilitude, a reality created within the fantasy context. And my version of that is broad. Now, one of the things from the get that bothered me about The Rise of Skywalker, and this has been reported, as I said, if you don't want to hear spoilers, I would jump out now. But the crawl, one of my favorite things in movie going in my life was how Star Wars presented its opening crawl. Now, I had seen obviously Flash Gordon serials of the 40s, and there were crawls at the beginning of those things. But one of the great things about the crawl in the original Star Wars was it sets up everything you need to know, because no one knew anything about the Star Wars universe. And you see this crawl, and within three paragraphs, everything you need to know is the table is set, the stage is set, and then the next 5 minutes reiterate everything that the crawl says. As famously, the first line of the crawl is, "It is a period of civil war." We all know what that means. So immediately you understand Rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory over the evil galactic empire. You get it. The table's set. You understand, okay, we're in a war-torn galaxy. It's a civil war, and there are rebels, and then we learn there's an empire. So immediately we completely understand what we're dealing with. What is the setting of this story? Because we all know what a civil war is. And even if you don't know exactly, you sort of understand it's happened in our own civilization many times. American history certainly has one big bloody civil war. that we can always refer back to. So it's understood. Now, the first line of the crawl of The Rise of Skywalker, as has been reported, is "The dead speak." Now, I think my problem with that immediately off the bat is, what does that mean? What does that mean? And it goes on and it sort of explains it. But to me, that is something that immediately is something that should be part of the story that's being told, right? So the first thing that ran through my mind is like, all right, if you set up that a long dead character is speaking to the galaxy, shouldn't we see it? Shouldn't we hear it? Isn't that important? And for me, if somebody starts broadcasting to the galaxy, we've always seen the beginning of Star Wars movies have traditionally, when the crawl fades away into the distance, the camera pans down and we come across some ship or some environment or a combination of the two, and we go from there. Well, wouldn't it have been interesting, if since this is the last Skywalker film, Skywalker saga, that we would see a ship, maybe some ship that's picking up some mysterious signal, and the signal starts and we would hear it. Like, they make a big deal. I'll just flat out say it. They make a big deal of saying it's, Palpatine is addressing the galaxy. Well, to me, that should be seen. That's the first instance that we should get from the film. I mean, just like in the crawl of Star Wars, when it explains rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base, then you see the rebel spaceship being chased by the Empire. It's all reiterated. So as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, wow, I hope we get to hear that. So are we going to see, the first thing in my mind, I'm like, are we going to see a quick succession of shots of all of the previous Star Wars film locations, where we're going to hear Palpatine's voice on every channel and maybe booming from the heavens itself? Because that to me is something that I would want to see or experience. What did he say? What was the immediate media reaction in the Star Wars universe? The guy that calls the races over at Mos Espa, the pod races, was that two-headed dude? Did he have a commentary on his show that night talking about Palpatine speaking? I mean, I know he's probably retired, but you don't know how old that dude was, or those dudes. So immediately I'm thinking to myself, well, here's something I would like to have experienced. And I think if you're using that moment to kick off the story, it's something that the audience should experience along with the rest of the Star Wars galaxy. That's just me. So when the movie starts, I was immediately put into this position where I'm wondering, as with all J.J. Abrams movies, why he glosses over these things. He glosses over what could be pretty amazing, especially chilling cinematic moments, and setting the stage. How does the galaxy react to this? One of the things, the Star Wars saga has always been about people within this massive galaxy, but this story kicks off saying that, Palpatine's talking to everybody, and I'm not gonna tell you how it goes from there. But to me, this is all sort of emblematic of J.J. Abrams' storytelling. He is I wouldn't say a master, but he is a man that uses cutscene or television storytelling on the big screen, and I don't think it works. I don't think it works, and I don't think J.J. Abrams. We've never seen an original film. I mean, Super 8 was kind of original, but it's aping Spielberg. Like, I don't know, what does J.J. Abrams think? Where is he coming from in terms of the stories that he's telling? I've just seen his riffs on other people's work, and his riffs seem rather shallow, and they're not very in depth. Everything is very surfacey. And he sees a lot of pre-production artwork. I think that he likes, I want to recreate that visceral image, but I want to do it on film. Now that's fine. I admire that. I think that's pretty cool if somebody's going to do that. But you need to earn. You can't just throw action scenes at people and expect them to care. because what really matters is your characters. Your characters must come first, and then the plot comes afterwards, because you have to establish characters and then put them into a story where the characters that you've established. I mean, what's really interesting is the beginning of Star Wars is a premise. The first 5 minutes on the, whether it's the Tantive or Tantive, the beginning is a premise. And there's a civil war going on, and we get to see the first 5 minutes of Star Wars shows us that. We literally see the good guys, the bad guys. We meet Princess Leia, and we see our eyes and ears, R2 and 3PO, who are the narrative, I guess you'd call it the narrative compass or whatever, the needle. We're going to be following R2 and 3PO through the entire rest of the movie. They're going to take us with them. We might as well be, when you're watching Star Wars, the audience is basically the third droid, because we don't know anything. Neither do they. You know, they're going to Tatooine. Like, what are we going to Tatooine for? C-3PO doesn't know. You know, he's going there. He's following his friend, who's got apparently a reason to go. And C-3PO's like, okay. I mean, I'll follow you, but what? I don't know. So what's really interesting is if you watch the original Star Wars, we sort of, the first character we identify with, we like Princess Leia, but really we identify with C-3PO, because if we were in that situation, we'd probably be thinking what he's thinking. And that's why Star Wars works so well, because we the audience are following these characters on this journey, and we are meeting the people as we go, and we understand what's happening. Well, J.J. Abrams cuts all of that out, and he says these things, he drops you into the middle of these situations, and you're not really sure yet who all of these people are, like where are they coming from. You meet Rey. There's an old screenwriting adage that you get into a scene late and you get out of a scene early, meaning that when you're writing, when it's better off, if you're going to have a scene with two people in a room, that you just cut to them if they're sitting at a dinner table, rather than watch them come in, fill their plates with food, and then sit down. You don't need any of that. You cut to them at the dinner table talking. You cut to somebody in mid-drink if you can, and then about to say something. Well, J.J. Abrams does that a lot with his movies, but the problem is he doesn't always have enough story there to tell you what's happening. You don't really know. You don't really understand where you're at. Now, in the first 45 minutes, as many people have talked about in the Rise of Skywalker, it is this breakneck paced hunting and gathering, and there's just all this stuff happening. And I found myself not that engaged. Like, there's a scene when they do this thing called light speed skipping, and the Millennium Falcon's just bouncing through. They're being chased, and they're skipping through light speed, and you get to see all these venues. I mean, first of all, I'm like, okay, this is traveling through light speed ain't like dust and crops, boy. We've established how light speed works. This idea that you can emerge from light speed in the middle of, say, a city on a planet is not how light speed works. Now, I understand. I mean, we're seeing it in the movie, so I guess that's how light speed works now. But first of all, Navicomputers, we established in Star Wars how light speed works. You have to plot a course, and you get to come out of light speed. Well, coming out of light speed, it used to be that you'd have to be pretty far away from a planetary body. You certainly couldn't make a light speed jump into, say, I don't know, the middle of downtown LA, because first of all, a planet's rotating. I mean, I won't get into the physics of why that is, but Star Wars did a really good job of establishing these rules. And one of the great things, as I talked about on this show, is when you have a fantasy context, whether the Cenobites are coming from hell because you've opened the Lament configuration, or whether you're wielding a lightsaber or traveling through hyperspace, part of what makes you as an audience member engaged is that there are rules that are set up for these fictional, crazy technologies. But within the context, the proscenium of the frame, they tell you how something works, which establishes, okay, so you can't jump at light speed. You can't just jump into the middle of the Death Star, and rather than having to make your way down a trench run and fire a proton torpedo into the exhaust port, why don't you just make a light speed jump into the center of the Death Star. You can't do that. First of all, you're traveling too fast. It would never work out. But when they have this scene with all of this light speed skipping, I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. But as a Star Wars fan, I'm asking myself, I'm like, bruh, you've already set up the parameters of how light speed works, and I believe it. I like it. You know, traveling through light speed is basically a way to travel the vast distances of space. It's a narrative shortcut, the same way the transporter is a narrative shortcut on Star Trek. You can just beam down to a planet. You don't have to get in a shuttle or fly down to a planet. You just beam there. Well, that's how light speed works. That's how you can get from place to place in the Star Wars universe, and nobody goes, hey, wait a minute. How long did it take to go from the asteroid field to Bespin? Well, they didn't have the hyperdrive. So I've always thought it probably took months for the Millennium Falcon to travel to Bespin, which is why Luke was on Dagobah, not for a weekend, but probably for at least a couple of months training with Yoda. Probably had to wash those clothes a lot, but still, I've always believed that. I saw The Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater. I never thought, because the hyperdrive was damaged, so the Millennium Falcon could not just jump to Bespin. But anyway, so I'm watching this scene now. Visually, it's really, really interesting. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I enjoyed this scene, but I'm also thinking this is also a bunch of bullshit. That this light speed skipping, they've set up this action scene, and for me, it's a false action scene because this light speed skipping thing is new, and now I'm just being jerked around. I don't know why this is. Why do we need this? I understand you're going to open the movie with a bang, but immediately, as a longtime Star Wars fan, I'm just like, I'm more interested in where the galaxy is at now that Palpatine is broadcasting. Does he broadcast every day? Has he made any grand pronouncements or statements about what he intends to do? It just says that he got a broadcast, and certain people like Mr. Kylo Ren want to know what's up with that. But immediately, I have questions. As a longtime Star Wars fan, my mind is filled with questions. So the story begins with me, and then, of course, you get these action scenes, and I'm just like, so the first 45 minutes, there's a lot of disconnect. There's a lot of stuff that you're just watching stuff happen. And I'll tell you, on the other hand, what I really enjoyed more than I've ever enjoyed anything in the sequel trilogy was the interplay with the characters. I liked seeing these characters all together. I liked seeing their interaction. I liked what was going on with Poe and Finn. I liked what was going on, even I know Leia's gone, but I liked what was going on with Leia and Rey and everyone else. I'm like, oh, there's real character interaction here, and I'm enjoying it. Why haven't we had more of this in this new series of films? So I think the turning point for me in the movie, I was sighing and I was like, ugh. The turning point for me is when Billy D. Williams shows up. The movie started to change for me, and I began to get into it. I was like, all right, I'm enjoying this movie. Suddenly there was a turn, and maybe it was because it slowed down. I mean, enough of this light speed skipping and all these MacGuffins, and there's all of this talk, plot. But I wanted to really get, as the movie began to be very focused, it was all over the place. And what I don't understand is anybody that's trying to make a Star Wars movie, all you have to do is look at Star Wars, because the original Star Wars is narrative simplicity. You've got one thing that's going on. You've basically got the main story and then a little branching story over at the Death Star, and then they meet. But it's very simple. You understand from the very beginning, from the crawl, we need to get these plans. We see the plans after the crawl recedes. Princess Leia puts the plans in R2 and 3PO, and they're off R2, but then 3PO accompanies them, and they're off to the races. And the entire film is very clear. You're not going here and you're not going there. It's one trail, and it's very easy to follow. And within that context, everything that happens, you totally understand. You have, as I've said before, you have a farmer, and you have a truck driver and a farmer, and a veteran of foreign wars. And these two sidekicks, basically two other peasants, Hidden Fortress-esque, Kurosawa-esque peasants in the guise of R2 and 3PO. You totally understand what's going on. You get who these characters are. You're never lost. They're never throwing things at you. Well, we have to go here, and suddenly this happens, or suddenly that happens. You understand what's going to happen. Mos Eisley Spaceport. You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. You have to watch yourself. This place is a little rough. Okay, you know they're going to a truck stop where it's rough trade. You've got bikers probably. I mean, you get it. You totally understand. So when you get there, the next thing that happens is, well, we don't serve their kind, so R2 and 3PO have to go away. You understand exactly what's happening throughout this whole movie. Now, and when you meet someone, when we met Han and Chewbacca, they are new characters, but they directly relate to what's going on. We have to book passage to the Alderaan system. They knew that. You knew that, as a viewer knows that. That's why we're going to Mos Eisley. We have to find a pilot. So you anticipate, narratively what's going to happen. Oh, here's our pilot. We don't know him yet, but he's got a Wookiee with him. And what was interesting is that you see Ben Kenobi talking to Chewbacca first. Chewbacca here is a mate on the ship, that may suit our efforts, or suit us, whatever they say. I forget the actual dialogue. But it's narrative simplicity, and it's beautifully done. In this movie, in Rise of Skywalker, as with a lot of J.J. Abrams' work, there's all this stuff that they just throw at you, and you're going here, you're going there, and you kind of always have to play catch up with everything that's happening. There's a lot of that in this movie, a lot of that, especially in the first part. But I have to say that there are things in this movie that I thought were really intriguing, that I really enjoyed. For instance, I really liked the continuation of the relationship with Rey and Kylo. And they're doing they continue their conversations that we saw that were begun in The Last Jedi. They continue them with interesting twists that happen. And I really liked all of that stuff. I thought it really worked. Really intriguing. I was completely with the movie when all of this stuff was going on. I really dug it. And I found myself, I don't know if it was at a halfway point. I'm going to have to go see it again. But I really found myself getting absorbed into the film. And what were the things that I liked the most? That relationship. Because it was intriguing. It was really interesting seeing Rey and Kylo develop. I mean, I like all the other characters more in this film than in the other two movies. I really do. But you don't. The real problem is everybody's kind of doing a different thing, and Kylo Ren from the beginning wants one thing to happen, and then he doesn't anymore. It's like, oh, well, I'll go do something else, and there is no clear-cut narrative thrust. And I had the same problem with The Force Awakens. I'm like, what is this movie about? And I don't think J.J. Abrams really knows what his movies are about, because what they're about is flashy visuals and all of that. But we, from a Star Wars movie, we love Star Wars, know that even though you're dealing with primal, the hero's journey, for instance, and I keep going back, and there's a reason why J.J. Abrams apes the original trilogy so much, because he doesn't have anything original to himself to say, to bring to it. And in the original movie, I thought the character of Luke Skywalker, whether you lived on a farm or grew up on a farm yourself, everybody understood what it's like to have parents or relatives and have chores to do and want to be anywhere else than where you are, and your friends are gone, and FOMO, you're not having a good time. And we all got it. And everybody got it. Kids got it. Teenagers got it. Adults got it. Grandparents got it. We all understood when Luke steps outside to turn off the power, or before the power is turned off by Uncle Owen, and you see those twin setting suns of Tatooine, we all got it, because we were all Luke Skywalker. And that's why people love Star Wars, is because they see themselves in those characters. They understand the motivations, because those characters represent who we all wanted to be when we were kids. We all dreamed of being some variation on a princess, or a swashbuckling pirate, or a space truck driver, the way Han Solo was, or maybe a naive, an older version of ourselves, maybe a little naive, but wanting to move out into the larger world. We all got it. We get all those things. And what's happened is, is, I think, with this modern trilogy, is those simple archetypical characters J.J. Abrams just expects us to understand, but that doesn't mean that you have to establish, even though they're new characters, you can't fall back on Star Wars stereotypes when you're storytelling. You have to establish those characters and give them their own identities that we will come to understand the same way. You can't make a character like Rey and give her, oh, my parents, I'm waiting for my parents. That's shorthanded because what comes the question is, why are you living here? If you're waiting for your parents, I understand, but why do you think they're going to come back to this particular place? Is this where you grew up in the husk of this AT-AT? I mean, none of that stuff made sense. It's a shorthand, but it really doesn't work. What works is seeing a character like Luke working with his uncle, doing chores. You understand, oh, he buys droids. He has to clean the droids. He has to go turn off the moisture evaporators. He has to do all of this stuff. And we learn because he talks to R2 and 3PO. We understand what kind of a person he is because there's emotion and there's empathy. All of these other characters, we're just supposed to believe. We meet Poe Dameron in the first scene of The Force Awakens. Well, who is he? He's a generic Star Wars character. You know, when we meet Han Solo, I mean, he's bragging about his ship. He's talking about the Kessel Run. Like, what the hell's a Kessel Run? You don't know, but you do get that he's bragging about his ship. You understand. But after this turn happens, I think that The Rise of Skywalker, and I have to tell you, it's a movie I liked more than The Force Awakens. The first part was just a bunch of gobbledygook. I'm like, okay, it's a pinball machine. We're pinballing around the galaxy. There's all this stuff happening. But there's a really interesting core story happening here, and it's happening between Rey and it's happening between Kylo Ren. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, all of this other stuff, I mean, they had to give it's like they had this really interesting idea, and that's one through line. And then there's all this other stuff because they had to give all this other stuff for all of our other characters to do. I can take or leave all of that stuff. But all of the great stuff that happens in that film, to me, the Kylo and Rey stuff was really intriguing. The same way that I find it very interesting that a lot of people who didn't like Last Jedi, a lot of them always point to Luke Skywalker is ruined as a character. But to me, I'm like, why does everybody expect a character after 30 years have gone by to be the exact same person that they were? I've read every kind of analysis of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, but I know that over the course of my life, I've known people that were one way when they were younger, and they've become disillusioned, and they're not that way anymore. I mean, that's just classic storytelling. You know, and at the end, somehow they have to find a way to perhaps just rediscover who they are and find some kind of redemption, which is one of the reasons I liked the Luke storyline in The Last Jedi. It was unexpected, but then it led to a confrontation that I thought was the most ballsy Jedi thing ever. You know, if you really believe that a Jedi is supposed to use the Force for defense, never for attack, what Luke does on Crate is one of the most ballsy moves ever. I thought that was cool. I liked that, which is why I liked The Last Jedi more than The Force Awakens. And I understand everyone's story criticisms about it, but to me, the core thing about that film is it was unexpected. Luke's journey was unexpected in the film, so I enjoyed it. It didn't bother me. I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. Because again, I'm trying to watch a movie on its own terms. I don't have any expectations. I think as people grow older, they don't have to be the same person they were 30 years ago. They've learned a lot. But I found that The Last Jedi, as it moved on, or The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, as it moved along, I became more and more interested in the movie. Now, I did object, just like I objected to this week's episode of The Mandalorian, when we're being thrown abilities that seem to be there's one in particular. I won't get into what it is, but there is an ability that we saw both in this week's episode of The Mandalorian and in The Rise of Skywalker. It's a Force ability. Well, it has to do with healing, I'll tell you that. That seems to me too much. They've pushed the idea of the Force too much. I mean, the Force is supposed to allow you. It's weird. I felt that the Force. Well, it's because she's strong with the Force. The Force doesn't give you abilities. You have to learn those abilities. It's not like the Matrix. You're not having things downloaded into your psyche that you can just do. What the Force does, if you're Force adept, it allows you to hone your own natural abilities much further than a normal human being can, or whatever alien race that you are. At least that's the way I always interpreted it in the first three movies. You could move faster, but it doesn't make you a superhero. So there are Force abilities in the movie. I'm kind of like, I don't know. But I went with it. I'm like, okay, I guess so. And I felt that there's a lot of things that happen. Like there's one thing in particular that it had an unexpected emotional resonance with me. I'm sure everybody would call them member berries. There's a lot of member berries in this movie, but I'm like, there are supposed to be. It is the concluding chapter. If you're watching a play or you're reading a book or something, the culmination is supposed to be full of things that refer back to earlier in the story. So those kinds of things didn't bother me. I quite enjoyed them. There's a scene with, well, I don't want to, I'm trying not to spoil a lot of stuff if you haven't seen it, but there's a scene with an original trilogy character and a scene with a new trilogy character that I found, I liked it. I was like, all right, this is good. I enjoy this. And there's a something happens. One of the characters does something that harks back to something from an earlier movie. They even play the same musical cue. And I liked it. And it was something that was set up in The Last Jedi. And it was paid off in this movie. And I'm like, all right, I'm in. I enjoyed it. So the idea, everyone knows Palpatine is in this movie. And I think the idea of having Palpatine in this movie was a very good idea. But again, one of my biggest problems in the film is that his return inherently brings with it many, 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 many questions. And then the movie itself piles up another 100 or 200 or 300 questions about his return that are never answered. They're never answered. And it bothered me because I was intrigued. I'm like, okay, you have all this lore. We have 42 years of Star Wars lore. We had the extended universe. I need a reason why. I mean, he's not just back. I mean, the last time we saw him thrown into a pit and then the Death Star exploded. Death Star 2 blew up. He's not just back. He's back with a lot of stuff and a lot of people and followers and all kinds of wackiness. And where did this all come from? The whole time I was thinking, who built all of this? Like, who's in all of these ships? Where do they come from? You know, and what was really interesting is I was thinking to myself, oh, if the dead speak, like I could imagine if I had made this movie, I probably would have had a scene in all the major worlds of the galactic core or wherever you're at. And the voice of Palpatine would have drawn, I don't know, 10% of the population of the galaxy to him or something. I mean, you should have explained all that, because that's where these movies, that's where J.J. Abrams movies lose me. Like suddenly I'm looking at this fleet of Star Destroyers. Well, were they built? I mean, they're equipped with new technology that we've seen before, sort of, but not in this form. And my question is like, okay, now people will say to me, well, Rob, I mean, who built the Death Star? Well, we know in Star Wars that the Death Star had been built over a long period of time. You don't even have to have seen any other movie. I'm talking about when we first saw Star Wars, they were able to get the plans. This was something, you understand that something like this is going to be constructed. And when you see it eventually, you realize there's tens of thousands, if not a million people that are on the Death Star. You get it. Like, I never questioned where it came from. Even though it's huge, there was only one of it. It was a big construction project. I believed it. This was before I saw Rogue One. The whole presence of the Emperor, which, by the way, Ian McDiarmid crushes it. He's awesome. But the whole time, I was just not buying it. I found myself, dude, you can't you can't bring a character that was definitively killed in a movie back and not give us any reason or understanding. You can't just, well, I guess he's just a member of the Sith. So what does that mean? And but I will say this. As the movie went along, I cared less and less about these things, and I sort of just went with it. Another thing that I thought was very interesting, the battle at the end of this movie, and there is a battle. I don't think anyone, it's no surprise that there's a battle. It's called Star Wars. There's usually a battle in the movie somewhere. One of the great things, again, about Star Wars, the original Star Wars, and its narrative simplicity is the battle wasn't just a generic battle. You had an objective. We had a very specific objective. We had to get a proton torpedo in the exhaust port so we can cause the chain reaction that will blow the station apart. In this film, this objective, it's like we have to get the screens down to do this. There is no real objective. I mean, there is, but it's not. It's very loosey-goosey. It's like, well, we'll just tell them to go here. Again, it's J.J. Abrams' brand of storytelling. And what's funny is the objective in the battle that you're told is the objective changes. When they get there, it's like, oh, that's not the right objective. And suddenly it's more like a free-for-all. And when you have no narrative understanding, you have to have a reason for having a battle. There's got to be a clear-cut objective. What are you trying to accomplish? And I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe this battle that there's not a whole lot of I don't want to again, but that said, I was watching this and I was enjoying it all. I just, at this point, I was like, okay, it's gobbledygook. It's Star Wars. We're having a battle, but I was not necessarily emotionally invested in it all. It was fun to watch, but it's just a bunch of stuff was happening. And I think it's problematic. I think it's J.J. Abrams. That's his style. That's what he does. And I think, again, why don't you go back and you look at Star Wars? Whenever there's a battle, even The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, from a narrative standpoint, have an understanding. Like when there's a shield that will deflect any bombardment on Hoth, so they have to get in underneath that shield and bring their armaments and bring their armies and bring their snowtroopers and their AT-ATs and their scout walkers and all these things. They have to bring them underneath that shield, and then they have to take the shield down so they can do whatever damage they need to do. And you understand that. The Empire is going to take down the shield, and then they're going to go into the base. You get all that. It's a very clear objective, and the rebels must stop this from happening, and they don't. And in this movie, there's this kind of this perfunctory lip service paid to this battle, but you look at it and you're like, my God, there's what you don't really know, but there's hundreds. It looks like hundreds and hundreds of Star Destroyers, and okay, well, are you telling me that what is your objective there? I mean, if they're all manned with people. These are questions that are running through my mind when I'm watching these movies that J.J. Abrams is never going to answer. And eventually I just throw up my arms and I'm like, is there enough going on here that I can be entertained by it? Or am I going to allow myself to get all tripped up? And I do. But while I was watching it, I really enjoyed the latter half of this movie. And ultimately, there was a really interesting, the relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren that developed began in The Last Jedi was beautifully carried forward into this movie. And I really enjoyed seeing it develop, and what was going on there I thought was really great. And what was happening psychically between Kylo Ren and Leia, I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed all of that because it was new. It was unique. It was something that I thought was very cool. And I think that I would have liked to have seen more along those lines. And yes, there's a lot of callbacks and there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of fan service. I don't think fan service is necessarily bad, like this one particular scene between an old character and a new character that pays off something that was established in The Last Jedi that I thought was really fun. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And it wasn't a huge thing, but it was something that was triumphant and heroic and in more of a quiet way. And I enjoyed it. This movie is not it's very interesting because I think we live in a world where, like, at least for me, when I go, I don't care what I've read, what I've heard. The experience of going to a movie is never the same as if you just read a review. Everything is different. There's music, there's editing, every camera move, all of that. You cannot judge a movie just listen to it. You have to see it for yourself. And I've often found that I take a lot of enjoyment out of many things from movies that people might not be looking at. From a filmmaking perspective, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I mean, J.J. Abrams has a lot of, his camera starts on one thing, so you get that, and then he pans up to another character. There's a lot of that. I'm curious about the filmmaking. I'm curious about a lot of cool practical effects. There's some new characters that I enjoyed that were practical characters. So there's a lot in this movie. It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag that started out and it annoyed me to no end. But as it moved along, this movie won me over. And by the end, I was entertained and I enjoyed it. And I sort of, I understand that this cutscene storytelling, and at the end, everything that happened, if I had directed the film, I wouldn't have made it in the way J.J. Abrams made it. And I would have done a polish on the script. And I would have had the periphery characters somehow play into the Kylo Ren and Rey storyline a little bit more. And I would have, by the way, my man, Richard E. Grant, everyone knows I love Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant was awesome as General Pride. He was awesome. I loved him. I thought he was great. And there was a lot of really great, I wish we saw more. I liked a lot of the stuff that went on with the Imperial, the First Order officers. Especially what Richard E. Grant was doing. There was one scene in the film that I absolutely relish that Richard E. Grant got. I'm so glad he got to do that. I hope Hot Toys makes an action figure of him because I will buy it. I really enjoyed that. But for the most part, I have to say that I enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker more than I enjoyed The Force Awakens. And a lot of people are talking about, oh, this movie's a mess, or it's all. Look, a lot of people, Star Wars means a lot to a lot of people, and it certainly means a lot to me. But I've seen Star Wars change and evolve over the years that I found that there's a lot of interesting stuff in this movie that the filmmakers probably didn't know how interesting it could possibly be, but it is pretty interesting. And, I've been talking about this for now 50 minutes, but I think everybody should go see it. And I think when you go in to the movie, let it wash over you. Just let it wash over you. And I think ultimately I was entertained by it. There was a lot to like about it. And I do think it's an example of cutscene storytelling. I think there's a lot that J.J. Abrams like, oh, who cares? That's just the way it is, which drives me bananas. I mean, I hate all of that. You can craft scenes. I don't know if J.J. Abrams knows how to craft scenes where character exposition also moves the plot forward. There's The Godfather is a perfect example of that. I mean, I don't understand. If I was going to make a Star Wars movie, I would look more toward, well, there's a reason why George Lucas looked at samurai movies. There's a reason why that works. And I think that if you went back and looked at different kinds of movies, and figured out ways that characters talking to one another can actually move the plot forward in very intriguing ways, I would like to have seen more of that. So my verdict about this movie is I found it quite rather enjoyable after a rough start. I liked the character interplay. There's some humorous lines that fall really flat, but for the most part, I really enjoyed watching this movie once it got started. After that first 45 minutes, which I was like, okay. And there's a scene at the beginning, almost right at the beginning, where you're like, wait a minute, ask a few questions, dude. I mean, I need to know what's happening here. Fill us in, because I want to believe in this, but I'm not believing in it. I need understanding, but I hate when it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Palpatine's back. No. Well, you didn't know how Darth Vader, came about in the first place when you saw Star Wars because you didn't need to know. The problem is there's a very lingering question in the Star Wars universe. When we last saw Sheev Palpatine, this was happening. When we last saw our heroes, they had just defeated Sheev Palpatine and they liberated the galaxy. But oh no, in Force Awakens, the First Order has arisen. Well, how did that happen? Who are they? Who's financing them? And I need to know. And it's not the same because you showed the Empire being destroyed. The idea that, someone else just took their place is lazy. It was always lazy. And for lifelong Star Wars fans, it's like, give me a break. Tell me what's happening. How did this occur? Otherwise, it just seemed like it was just very, very lazy. But anyway, long story short, not a perfect movie. But as a fan of pulp science fiction, which I am, I found a lot to enjoy in this film. And there were one time in particular, I actually teared up. Toward the end. And it was just a quiet scene. And I didn't expect it either. I actually kind of got choked up twice in this movie. And both involved original trilogy characters. But one I thought was a really nice touch. And the other just harked back to an earlier scene. And a scene in The Empire Strikes Back, actually, that really got to me. So I liked Return of the Jedi. I liked Rise of Skywalker. I liked it. I love it. I didn't love it. I wanted to love it. Is it a mess? Absolutely. It is a mess. But it's a mess that I can live with, and I actually got some enjoyment out of. I wish, when we live in a world where a Dark Crystal TV show is far more complex and far more thought out and far more interesting than this new Star Wars movie, we are living in a strange world. We really are. But I did like the film, ultimately. I don't think it's a particularly good movie, but I liked it. I liked it more than I liked Force Awakens. And I dare say I certainly liked it more than both of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies that he directed. By far. But yeah. And I thought there was enough intriguing stuff in there. It made me for the very first time, I have to say this, really liked how Finn was portrayed in the movie. Really liked how Poe Dameron was portrayed. Finally, they gave C-3PO stuff to do, which I really liked. Really liked his character. There's some classic Star Wars humor. There was a little bit that fell flat too. R2-D2 has been done dirty by this entire trilogy, and they should call his agent, or he should call his manager and get him out of his next contract. What they've done to R2-D2 is inexplicably, I just don't get it. But yeah. So anyway, I've noticed that people have been sending in a lot of chats, so I was going to get to those. But yeah, that is sort of look. I'll do a spoiler review and really we'll have a long conversation later. But for now, that's about all I can say without really getting into spoiler territory. JB Bonifacio is here. He says, tonight we get Raylo. Yeah, look up the Oral Knots, the AURAL, the Oral Knots song. They did a song called Raylo. And Allie State, our columnist who writes the Feminerd Gaze on our website, did write her new column, Why We Need Raylo. And so go to the Burnettwork.net. Next time you write me a letter, check out her column, The Feminerd Gaze. Haskell 420 says, if the Rise of Skywalker crawl began, there is a disturbance in the Force. A long-past enemy has returned, and the Resistance has sent their warriors to seek out the truth of this evil resurgence. It would have been great. Yeah, it would have. I mean, I think that, again, I like that a lot. Again, it's something that, it really requires, you've got to really understand what you're doing. And that's where great writing comes from. A movie like Star Wars needs great writing, just like any other movie. But I like that idea. Sam O'Neill is here. Hi, Rob. First time sending a super chat. Well, thank you so much. Very kind of you. Thanks for supporting the channel. First time sending a super chat. My friends don't like movies. Really? Or trying like that, so I used to keep my inner geek to myself. But after listening to you on John's channel and yours, you remind me to let it shine bright. Well, listen, Sam, let me tell you, the geeks won, and I think one of the things that people forget about being a geek, I mean, people that are non-geeks, and I think being a geek is such a weird thing to say now, but because we all kind of are, but it made me more interested. Look, it might be all flights of fancy and you're talking about people that don't really exist, but it did make me interested in the world. I mean, the Star Wars soundtrack led me to my mom's Beethoven record collection, and I became a fan of classical music because I understood that just listening to music could be very evocative. And I think that being a geek makes you more interested in the world around you. So I'm glad you found our channels. I'm glad that you enjoy being here. I think the community that we're building here at the Post-Geek Singularity is great. By the way, if you like these chats, please hit like and please subscribe to the channel. That always helps. Trying to get those analytics up there, trying to preach mostly a message of positivity in the geek world. That's kind of my brand, because why not? I mean, The Witcher got dropped on Netflix yesterday and nobody even knew. My God, Expanse season 4, I just finished that. We live in fantastic times. There's amazing stuff. The idea that after 42 years, we just got a gigantic Star Wars movie dropped in our laps, and I'm not just saying we need to lap anything up that we're given, but there's enough out there now that you can be fans of a lot of different things. You don't have to, any table scraps, any science fiction, fantasy, or horror table scraps I got when I was a kid, I was like, please, sir, may I have some more? Now there's so much of it. It's great. I mean, I'm sitting in that theater, the IMAX theater, the world famous Chinese theater last night, and before Rise of Skywalker opened, I mean, I got to watch a trailer for Mulan, for No Time to Die. I got to watch the prologue of Christopher Nolan's Tenet, Black Widow, and I'm just like, man, we live in a great time to be alive if you love this stuff. I mean, we're getting some great stuff. So there's no reason to be bitter. We're getting a lot of things. If one thing it doesn't float your boat, there's going to be something else that's going to come along that might. We are living in wondrous times, my friends. I've been saying that on Collider Heroes, then I was saying it on the John Campea show. Now I'm saying it on my show. We live in great times. There is so much surrounding us to love. I mean, heck, look at this. I just got this from the UK, even though I already have Exorcist 3 like 3 different times on but this has that new Mark Kermode commentary. I don't even remember ordering that. I guess I ordered it when it was first announced. I mean, I got Mark Kermode talking to me about Exorcist 3, and there's nobody that loves Exorcist 3 more than Mark Kermode. It's like me talking about tough turf. Amazing. The world is a pretty great place, and there's so much geek stuff, geek wondrousness all around us that we should be. I'm not saying, again, that, you have to be discerning. I mean, I like good geek stuff. I like the good stuff, just like I like drinking good beer. I like drinking good wine. It doesn't mean I won't drink, cheap wine on the beach, or I'll pick up a Bud Light now and again, even though I'm loath to do so. But hey, there's great stuff surrounding us for all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, beliefs, all of you imagination connoisseurs, whatever you want, we're getting it. I mean, there's a Witcher TV show. There's Jonathan Mayberry's V-Wars is on. You got Witcher on Netflix. You got V-Wars on Netflix. We got Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. We got The Expanse. I mean, we are getting some high quality genre entertainment. It's in the air and everywhere. And my God, there's a lot to be excited about. So, Sam, go on. You do you. And don't worry about your friends. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what. I'll bet you, if you said to these friends of yours, if you said, look, man, let me show you something. I want to show you something. Pick your favorite thing. Don't pick Star Wars or something that everybody kind of knows about that's in the pop culture zeitgeist. Pick something that you really love, that you think your friends might dig too. They might not ever watch something like what you want to show them, but show them something. Try and introduce them to things. Don't shove it down their throats, but say, hey, man, I'd like to show you something that what just popped into my mind? There's a band called the Scissor Sisters. Jake Shears is their lead singer. I'm a huge fan of the Scissor Sisters, and they have a song called Take Your Mama. And basically, it's a song about coming out. And introducing your mother to the lifestyle that you lead if you're gay, and show her what it's all about. Well, I feel the same way that when you're kind of a geek. If you're a closeted geek, you got to do the same thing. You got to, instead of taking your mom out, take your friends out and show them what it's all about. I cannot believe I'm making a Scissor Sister reference. Jake Shears, I wish the Scissors would form again, but Jake's on a solo tip now. But I got to tell you, man, woo, Invisible Light, listen to that song. It's like a Frankie Goes to Hollywood homage. I'm telling you, I'm not going to go off on a Scissor Sister tangent, but it's the same kind of thing. Get out there, show your friends what it's all about, and educate them. Say, look, this is important to me. Let me show it to you. I want to share it with you, and let me get your opinion. What do you guys think? And then talk to them. You might be surprised. They might be into it. They might call you up and say, hey, you know that thing you showed me? I'd like to see more of it. Is there more of it? Dan V900 says, in regards to the dead speaking from the crawl with a threat, those lines were recorded and are in the Fortnite tie-in. I'm not making that up. It stuns me where the crawl must be done last minute. Is that true? Wow. Okay. But, I mean, wouldn't that have been, to me, what an epic, you're making the last movie in the Skywalker saga. Obviously, Emperor Palpatine's a big part of that. If Palpatine was speaking and you saw, like, if we were making a movie about an alien invasion or something, what better way to start the movie than to see all of these planetary systems that we've seen and it's not like we don't see planetary systems in the movie. We see all these planetary systems from the previous films, and you hear the voice. And what if people were affected? What if people were Palpatine? Where did these people come from? They came once they heard his voice. They dropped everything they were doing zombie-like, and they got in whatever ship they could, and they took off to wherever, to Exegol, and they went to go they want to go be by Palpatine's side, like half the galaxy, and the galaxy's in a state of turmoil. I mean, that could have been an awesome first 5 minutes where you hear his voice and there's a montage of all these planets where people are literally just walking off their lives like they've been ensorcelled. That would have been great. Creepy, weird. I don't know. That's what I would have done. Dan V900 says he sent me a DM with the link. Well, thank you for that. I will look at it. Tibula the Spider Monkey says, all the way from Australia, says, I'm going, second person from Australia. I'm going Sunday night to see The Rise of Skywalker. I'll make up my own mind then, seeing some majorly differing views. Truthfully, I'm mostly going for Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant is so great. And, I thought he wasn't going to get enough screen time. He gets, not only does he get, look, he doesn't get enough screen time, but he just keeps getting better and better the more you see him. And then there is a moment it's one of my favorite moments in the film that involves him, and you will laugh out loud, and it's good. Richard E. Grant was good, and I loved how he was contorting his face. He had this like long, I don't know how he did. This whole face was frowning. I loved it. He was definitely. They needed to give him more time. Piggy 16 says, I like Richard E. Grant, but thought he was weak in The Rise of Skywalker. Quite a flat performance. He was clearly going for menacing, but just came across like a robot. I didn't feel that way. I mean, I really enjoyed him. I thought he could have look, if he was given more to do. But I liked him. I thought he was good. I thought he looked great. I really liked him a lot. Frayant Production says this felt like a Reddit fan film version of episode 9. Yeah, again, I can see that, but I go in mostly. I want to like things. I really do. I do want to like things. And I think I liked it a lot more than a lot of people probably would. But yeah, Emil Johansson is here. His rankings are Star Wars. I don't call Star Wars A New Hope. It was Star Wars when I saw it. Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, Revenge of the Sith, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Rise of Skywalker, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rogue One, and Solo. Interesting. Willow Yang is here. Oh, I got a letter coming up from Willow Yang. Woo, do I. Willow Yang says, I won't be seeing The Rise of Skywalker until next Saturday. Good thing I don't mind spoilers. Someday I'll write a dissertation on why Reylo's an abomination. Well, you should, and write it for Willow Talk, please. Anthony Gonzalez says, so what are the Knights of Ren? No idea. They fight like riot police, not like knights. Knights should have swords, right? Thought they were Luke's dropouts. You know what, Anthony? Uh, those are things like the Knights of Ren. Who are they? What are they? What are they doing? Don't know. Don't know. And my whole thing is, if you cannot give us enough, if you cannot introduce something and we understand who and what they are, why introduce them? And yes, they're there. I don't know. I mean, look, Carrie Russell's character. Did we need her in the movie? Probably not. You never even see her face. I liked her character. I like the look of her character. And I kind of like what happened. I like the relationship she has in the film, but it's just there's all this stuff happening. Do we need any of that? And I always wonder. Pierre Fillion says, I hated the movie. Unfortunately, especially what they did to General Hux. Well, I'll let everyone find that out for themselves. I can understand where you're coming from. The Hux thing worked for me. Evan Newman says the Emperor's ships should have been manned by reactivated prequel droids. It would have explained how the ships were manned so quickly and that Palpatine had a backup plan in place for years. You know what, Evan? That's a great idea. That's a great idea. And it again, it makes sense. I really wish that were the case. It would have been, I would have bought into that. And it would have immediately, you're like, okay, the question would have been answered. So, especially if you saw those ships coming to life, like there's a quick montage of all these ships. I mean, Stubble McShave says the economics of that fleet doesn't make any sense. Again, I agree with you. You don't have to show everything to make people understand anything. You just have to give them something like there are questions that arise. If you have a massive fleet of hundreds and hundreds of mile-long Star Destroyers, where are they manned? Who is manning them? Why are they being manned? That's why I wanted to see like my opening. If I had opened the movie, that's what I would have liked. And it's strange. And I don't like watching movies and having those kinds of questions. And J.J. Abrams doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of that. He just, if he sees somebody does a really cool pre-production painting, he's like, let's do that. And then what happens is we, as astute Star Wars viewers who are following the lore and following the mythology, you're asking yourself, well, wait a minute. Okay, that's cool. But now you have to at least make me believe it. I need to believe in it. I hate seeing these images. Star Killer Base was the same thing. I'm like, I don't believe this. You have not made me believe. People are like, well, why do you believe the Death Star? Well, because they showed me enough of the Death Star. Everybody, even the Imperial officers are talking about, well, it's the ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force, and also dangerous to your Starfleet commander, not to this battle station. It's even the Empire is like, oh, that's pretty amazing. There's that there's a push and there's a pull. So they gave you enough. I mean, Star Wars is a brilliant film in terms of creating mythology and world building within the context of a very simple story. And they never get away from the story. They never allow exposition to bog the story down, but the exposition is definitely there. You're seeing how the Empire, one of the great world building scenes in any movie is the scene with the Imperial officers that's in that film, which is in Star Wars. It's really great. And to me, that's how you do that kind of a scene. But you're right, Stubble. What are the economics there? I mean, who built those ships? Like we know from the end of Revenge of the Sith, it took a long time to build the Death Star. We didn't know that in Star Wars when it first came out, but at least they took into consideration. It took like 20 years. So how long does it take to build that big of a fleet? And at least somebody's sticking those new weapons on them. Who did that? Jonathan Peck says, are you curious about what Colin Trevorrow could have been doing with episode 9? And do you think they could stick with one filmmaker with the trilogy like Peter Jackson with Lord of the Rings instead of different directors for each film? Oh, Jonathan, great question. First of all, and also thanks for supporting the channel. Absolutely. I think Here's what I do not understand. I don't understand when you're making a movie like Star Wars, all of the sets, like there are things that happen. I'm going to talk about one other thing I really, that really bothered me. There is a scene, there's a couple of scenes that are set on a first order ship where our characters, they just managed to get on board the ship. And I'm like, you know, and everyone's like, everyone will tell you like, well, it's just like when the Millennium Falcon landed on the Death Star. No, there was a ruse. The Millennium Falcon got pulled in with the tractor beams. Our characters were hiding. So, you know, this idea that what happens in this movie, it's like, oh, wait a minute, dudes. How does you just land in an Imperial ship and get out and saunter through the no. Our characters had a plan, they executed the plan. So you believed it when our characters in Star Wars were infiltrating the Death Star. Let's just say they play that beat again in Rise of Skywalker, and it doesn't work so much. And I can't stand it. People are like, well, they did it in this movie. It's not the same thing at all. And I don't buy it. But yeah, I'm curious. Jonathan, I think absolutely if you're making a trilogy of movies like Star Wars, I do not understand why all three films were not conceived of at the same time and directed by one person, and they were all shot at once. That's what I would have done. That's what I would have done. You spend a long time honing your scripts. You know, you have your writer's room, whatever, however you're going to do it. But I think that with these movies, just from a production standpoint, you redress your sets and they could be all the different Star Destroyers that we've seen for the last three films. I don't get it. I really don't understand. Various locations, you only go to those locations once. You shoot out what you need. I think Lord of the Rings proved, and everybody will tell you, if you're in Hollywood, here's what everybody would say. Well, Rob, those are based on previously existing books, so we knew what was going to happen. Well, if you look at something like The Expanse, which is, I think, one of the things they don't talk about enough about The Expanse, I like the show very much. It is a wonderfully produced science fiction show because they know they've got the whole season beat out because they have the books to go by. You know, they're basing them on the Expanse novels. So the reason that show can look as big as expansive as it does on a television budget is because they know where they're going. It does not. I do not understand in the wake of Lord of the Rings, if you're going to make a trilogy and why they weren't planning Star Wars as a trilogy from the get. I don't know. I mean, they know they're going to make episode 7, 8, 9. Why wasn't those all three movies should have been conceived? And if you want to have the same director, you should still shoot them all at one time. I get it though, risk averse Disney. I understand, but I do think I'm all about authorship. And this was telling a single story. It's always better to have more authorship than less. And I think the Star Wars films, like the Lord of the Rings movies, would lend themselves to having one director, one directorial voice. Of course, it's a bigger crapshoot on the front end. Who knows? Squidward Tentacles says, Force Power saber fights, the best out of the 9 films. Felt the most Star Wars ever and gives great opportunity for future Star Wars films to explore and use. I agree. I thought, look, that scene with the remnants of the Death Star that we've all seen in the trailers, that was a great lightsaber battle. I really felt that the lightsaber battles were terrific. Enjoyed them immensely, and I 100% agree with you. I think that that was some great stuff about the film, and I certainly loved that. Dieter Bastian, all the way from Deutschland. An AC from MK. An AC from MK. Thanks for the info, Rob. Sounds great. An AC from MK. What I know, I should know exactly what that is, but I don't know what that is. What am I missing? Why? I know it's so obvious. AC. I don't know. I don't know, Dieter. I don't know. I'm not getting it. But anyway, yeah. I don't know what you mean. But anyway, you know what? I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to get right into Willow Yang's letter because Willow Yang wrote a letter and I Every time Willow Yang writes a letter, she doesn't know who E.F. Hutton is, but Willow Yang is like the E.F. Hutton of this channel. Actually, there's a lot of you who are like the E.F. Hutton of this channel, but Willow Yang was the first. Willow writes, and this is so great, she wrote a letter about the very first Star Trek pilot, The Cage, that they pretty much hung most of Discovery around. So take it away, Willow. I am writing to discuss the failed first pilot of the original series, that would be Star Trek, The Cage. The episode featured Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike, which really bewildered me when I first watched the episode. Wait, that's not William Shatner. Now, this wasn't the first time I'd seen the character. I was actually introduced to Pike through J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. What really got me interested in him, however, was Star Trek Discovery, because regardless of what your opinion is of the show, I do think that most of us can at least agree that Anson Mount is pretty great. He is pretty great. Jeffrey Hunter's take on the character felt rather different from Mount's. He was a much more burnout and disillusioned captain who, when we were introduced to him, was already looking to retire and get away from all the responsibilities that he had been burdened with. While I don't think that's fair to assess Hunter's performance from the single episode of Star Trek that he was in, I love Patrick Stewart's Picard, but it did take a while for him to grow on me. I found him to be lacking in some of the charm that Mount, Shatner, and Stewart were able to bring to their roles. To be fair, that's why the network wanted him replaced. Being a show from the 1960s, there was certainly some dialogue that did feel a bit outdated. One line particularly stood out was when Pike stated that he was uncomfortable about having a woman on the bridge. Then he proceeded to assure his female first officer that she was different, unwittingly digging himself into a deeper hole. It is a bit difficult now to believe that someone a few hundred years into the future might still have issues with the gender of his coworkers. I totally agree with you, but, look at how fast things change in the human world. However, The Cage was a pilot, and it is likely that many of the ideas and concepts of the first Star Trek universe might not have been fully developed, which is why when Spock smiles, they shouldn't hang whole episodes of Discovery on it. More importantly, The Cage did feature a female first officer in Majel Barrett's number 1, something that was probably unheard of and groundbreaking during the time of the episode's release. Yes, it was. Ignoring the possible nepotism behind her casting, I quite appreciated Barrett's take on the character. She had a strong presence and authority, and I thought that she out-Vulcaned Spock in the pilot with her cool, measured response to Vina's insult. On a side note, it was a bit disconcerting to see Spock grinning and then a little later on shouting, "The women!" If I had known better, I'd have thought he was being possessed by an incorporeal alien again. The Cage featured the first of what is to be quite a large pantheon of smug, superpowered aliens that consider themselves to be above humans, but ultimately realize that they aren't as high and mighty as they thought themselves to be. In relation to the Telosians, there is one detail in the menagerie that did puzzle me, and that is the reveal that visiting Talos 4 is the only crime in the Federation that's punishable by death. Why? Sure, the Telosians don't appear to be the friendliest aliens, but they certainly aren't the worst either. Heck, they were willing to help Pike out. It's true, but their powers of illusion could be very dangerous if anyone else learned them. Moreover, considering that they can apparently project their illusions from many light years away, it doesn't really seem to matter all that much whether someone is physically on the planet or not. Personally, I felt that the death penalty was added to up the stakes and drama rather than for a logical reason. In my opinion, the jeopardization of Spock's career is already sufficient to communicate his loyalty to Pike. The death penalty just felt strange and unreasonable. One thing that surprised me when I first watched The Cage was the episode's depiction of sexuality, which, from my understanding, was part of the reason for its rejection. The central ploy of the Telosians was to have Vina and Pike shag so that they could give rise to a population of human slaves. I guess the Telosians weren't concerned about inbreeding. To that end, Vina was practically throwing herself at Pike, both to avoid punishment from the Telosians and also probably because she hasn't seen a man in decades. They go through a series of scenarios, first with the old-fashioned hero rescuing the damsel in distress, followed by an idyllic romantic picnic. When Pike fails to respond to either illusion, Vina reasons that a fantasy must be something a person cannot do, and for a reputable man like Pike, what is likely enticing to him is something more salacious. She adopts the guise of an Orion exotic dancer, or an Orion slave girl, as they called her. Although Pike still refused to be swayed by the illusion, ironically, he did earlier on confide to his doctor, Boyce, of his desire to become a trader on Orion, so it would appear that Vina might be onto something. The episode additionally makes some cheeky remarks about number one and Pike's yeomen and their secret sexual feelings towards him. Women do like to fantasize, and I thought that it was pretty great for a show from the 60s to make such an observation, especially with characters who are respectable, who don't fit the archetype of an immoral, promiscuous harlot. On my initial viewing of The Cage, the ending of the episode did bother me somewhat with Vina's decision to remain on Talos 4. The reveal of Vina's true form is quite shocking, although it was already hinted at by number one, who deduced that she must be a lot older than she appeared, and it seemed at first glance that it's logical for her to remain on the planet where she can always appear young and beautiful. But is it? Pike in the menagerie was horrifically handicapped to the point where he couldn't even talk, although as a modern viewer I cannot help but wonder why he wasn't provided with a speech-generating device a la Stephen Hawking. His quality of life was nil. Vina, while disfigured, states clearly that everything works. She isn't worse off than a number of people we see today who suffer from physical disability. More importantly, the Talosians weren't exactly treating her particularly well. They regarded humans as livestock. They were shown to be torturing and punishing her for disobedience. I didn't really like how Pike instantaneously agreed with her reasons for remaining on Talos 4 upon finding out she was no longer beautiful. It did feel a bit sexist to me, with its implication that a woman's appearance is of the utmost value, and the worst thing that can happen to her is to be old and unattractive. I've had a long time to mull over the ending, and I do now think that the conclusion is probably meant to feel dissatisfying. Star Trek doesn't shy away from endings that are tragic, uncomfortable, or controversial, and that is something that seems to have been established in The Cage. Vina makes a decision I didn't really like, but it is also understandable given the allure of being able to live in a fantasy where you can be free from the flaws and limitations of your physical body. As the Talosians told Pike, she has an illusion, and you have your reality. May you find your way as pleasant. Star Trek presents choices, and it's up to us to decide what we would have done in such a situation. Live long and prosper, Willow. Well, another great letter from Willow. I love Willow's letters. You know what, though, Willow? I have a different take on the end of the episode with Vina. I don't think it's about her age, and I don't think it's about her beauty. I think it's about the fact that after the crash, she was left in a broken body. And her illusion, it not just is that she's young and beautiful, but she can also run and she can move and she can feel like not necessarily a real woman, but a real person. And that's what she really wants, is to feel whole again. And I don't think it's about her vanity. I never thought, even as a little kid, I understood that. And what happens to Pike in the same way, I mean, it mirrors what happens to Vina. The Berthold Rays, he rescued people, and his body was left a shriveled husk. And in getting his illusory body, he then could feel normal. He could walk, he could run, he could breathe normally, he could talk to people. All the things that were removed and taken away from him, he got back. And I think it was more about that than anything else. But again, another great letter from Willow. One day, Willow, we're going to hang out, talk, because I want to hear. Oh, Dieter Bastian from Deutschland says your mention of the Mark Kermode audio commentary, and a audio commentary from Mark Kermode. Of course, I didn't make that leap. Yes, that was. I already have Exorcist 3 twice. I have the Shout Factory disc and I have the Warner release, but I wanted to get the disc for the Mark Kermode commentary because Mark Kermode, I love Mark Kermode, but the fact that he has been a long champion, I don't think The Exorcist, the original cut, well, at least the work print cut, would exist if it wasn't for his efforts. So I can't wait to hear. There's nothing I like better than hearing a fan of something wax rhapsodic about that thing that they love. So I'm expecting big things from Mark Kermode's audio commentary. So cheers to Mark Kermode for doing that. Brandon Valenzuela says, I have a massive problem with Ray not facing any adversity or losing a single fight. Luke got his damn hand cut off, for God's sake. It was crazy hearing half the theater clap and the other half silent, myself included. You know what, man? I cannot disagree with you. I think that's a great observation. And what's interesting to me is the movie was going into a direction with Ray that I thought it was going to go and fully embrace. And I would like to have seen that. I think I thought where this movie, well, I can't even get into that because I don't want to talk about that, but I don't disagree with you. I think Rey should have had, let's just say, I agree. and it would have, I think, been more resonant. But yes, Rey has never faced true adversity, and it would have been nice if she faced the ultimate adversity. I mean, she has there's a climax to the movie, but I think you're right. I think that if I had made Last Jedi, the reason it was called that is because Rey would have succumbed to the dark side. She would have ridden off. Reylo would have ridden off into the sunset together at the end of Last Jedi. That's how I would have made that movie. And then this movie was all about going to get her back. I mean, they didn't do that, but I think it would have been a great idea. So again, who knows? But you're not wrong. I don't think you're wrong at all. By the way, thanks for supporting the channel, man. I very much appreciate that. By the way, I took, for those people keep asking me, I guess because it's Christmas, they're like, how can we support you? I did put, it's at the top of the description now. I took John Campia's lead and I put a tip thing for people. So if you want to support the channel, I wouldn't say no. You can now tip the channel. And when you do, if anybody wants to tip the channel, please put a question down and I'll answer it the next day. I try to answer it the same day, but because people can do it 24 hours a day, I'm going to do it the next show. So if you want to support the channel, you can. In the description, there is you can tip me if you want. No, you don't have to. It's just people have been asking me, and I'm like, all right, well, sure. Just like you'll be able to join the channel on YouTube soon. You people are nice. You people treat me well. Let's see. Boy, I have a lot of letters, and there's good letters. This is a good one. No one's ever written about this. I had to read this. I think this is a letter. It's a new letter. But I love this letter. This letter is great. This letter comes from Nick the Friendly Borg. Did a little editing of this letter. But Nick the Friendly Borg, he writes to the Post-Geek Singularity from Greece. Hello, Rob. It's been a while since my first letter. Okay, Nick the Borg, I guess, has written before. But I have been watching, of course. My main reason for writing this time is to answer the question about when I turned to the geek side and to reminisce about a show I used to watch while I was growing up here in Greece. I thought it would be interesting to pinpoint the exact time I became an imagination connoisseur. Yes, I love letters like this. I love letters about the secret origin of your imagination connoisseurship. Share the love for the show that helped me get there, explain why it left a mark with me at such a young age, and discuss why it isn't mentioned much these days. Maybe because it is associated with a sad story or it's considered campy, I don't know. But for the 8-year-old me, it was my first love, sci-fi adventure story during the days when my geeky heart was shaped. So I thought I would share it with the rest of this community and you as others have. The show I am referring to is Voyagers. No, not Star Trek Voyagers, nor Star Trek Voyager, but rather Voyagers. As much as I became a Star Trek fan a few years later, it was this show that first aired on NBC during the 1982-83 season that left an indelible mark on me. I used to watch Voyagers. I should mention that I watched it in 1985, as was the case with many shows back then. We watched them in Greece a year or two after they aired on the US, unlike today where everything is instantaneously accessible to anyone, which is great, by the way. The show starred Mino Palouse as Jeffrey Jones and John Eric Hexum as Phoenix Bog. The name sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Phoenix Bog was one of a society of time travelers called Voyagers who used a handheld device called the Omni to travel through history and give it a push when it's needed, as was the tagline. I have to tell you, when it comes to time traveling devices, the Omni to me is up there with the DeLorean, and one day I would like to find and own one. Through a mishap, Jeffrey tags along with Phoenix for the journey, and together they go on historical adventures, meeting historical figures from Cleopatra to Lawrence of Arabia to Thomas Edison, excellently played by Stephen Keats, to Jack the Ripper, etc. Familiar names in the credits include Jonathan Frakes, Judson Scott, Finola Flanagan, Gregory Eisen, John Anderson, Ed Begley Jr., Donald Petrie, mostly known for directing, and many more. Being an 8-year-old at the time, this show came to me at the right age. One of the show's biggest draws was the promotion of learning and of reading books. Each show ended with the phrase, if you want to learn more about Spartacus, or the historical figure featured in the episode, take a voyage down to your public library. It's all in books. I remember in one of your shows, Rob, you mentioned the TV series where the Titanic was featured, and you didn't mention the Voyagers episode, Voyagers of the Titanic, which I recommend watching, and was also released as a 2-part episode on VHS in 1984. Wrapped in the science fiction element of time travel, this show was all I could think of. It fascinated me to a great extent, encouraged me to read more, and I could not wait for Saturdays at 8 to watch it. Hexam's good looks, deep voice, and physique went in contrast with the character's playfulness and made him endearing and fun to watch, whereas Palouse's brainy and knowledgeable Jeffrey was a perfect match. The chemistry between the leads is undeniable and charming. As is the case with many good shows, though we only got 20 episodes because Voyagers went up against 60 Minutes. From what I read, was a ratings monster at the time, and the show was canceled. Yeah, it was. You couldn't go up against 60 Minutes ever at 7 o'clock in America and win. I do believe the show became an international success after some time, but the actors had moved on to other projects. Sadly, for those who don't know or remember, John Eric Hexam was accidentally killed on the set of his next show, Cover Up, while playing with a prop gun. He thought blanks wouldn't hurt him, but unfortunately, they did. His last act on this world was to give life to 6 other people with his organ donation, a rarity in those days. I will never forget Voyagers. It nudged me down the right direction, much like Jeffrey nudged Moses in the pilot episode. Ever since then, I have looked for time-traveling shows like Quantum Leap, or most recently, Timeless, for which Voyagers was an inspiration, according to its creator. I do still watch those episodes, and I would sincerely urge today's parents to show this series to their kids. Finally, if people want to find out more about this great and greatly underappreciated show, there is a website which contains a wealth of info and pictures. Thanks for bearing with this nostalgia trip, and keep up the good work, Rob. Nick from Greece. Well, Nick from Greece, thank you very much for writing in. And if you are interested in the Voyager show, I'm putting into the live chat right now. I'm going to put in the link that Nick sent me. So here you go. It's in the live chat. Check it out. All right. I love letters like that. I love hearing about people's geek journeys. I think it's always a fun thing to do. And so I get to know you better. Let's see. Now, here we go. This one, getting back onto the topic of the day. This letter comes from Curtis Joseph. Dear Rob, I hope you are greatly well, and I thank you for reading my letter on show 283. Today is Wednesday, December 18th, 2019. I write to you while at the same time astutely listening to the active current live stream of Midnight's Edge Roundtable Q&A of the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker spoilers. And let me tell you, sir, all of the leaks that were flooding the net for the past several weeks are absolutely true. In the immortal words of Charlie Brown, good grief. I have never been one nor a fan for big-time spoilers, but I have to say this time around, the white noise that could have been thought legitimately as a smart distraction tactic by Disney to swiftly brush off skepticism from jaded fans and pundits about believing whether or not any of the film's leaks were false or true. Well, for all of Disney's best efforts, it is official and apparently accurate that their supposed lack there of smart tracks has fired back on them. Andre from Midnight's Edge did not hold back on his views, and oh yes, his blunt, accurate truths are well warranted. I know this firmly from watching some of my favorite pundits like Nerdrotic, Doomcock, and Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, just to name a few, and their blunt thoughts on Disney. I don't always agree with what they say, but I fully respect their views. Rest assured of that. It is truly sad that Bob Iger didn't take an absolute stance and put the full brakes on this film before it entered post-production and charge Abrams and Terrio with the task of writing a newer script and fully shoot it for a December 2021 release. Don't get me wrong, I fully understand a major scheduled film such as The Rise of Skywalker had to be kept, given the small window of time for reshoots that officially took place at Bad Robot Productions back in late September to the middle of October. But many jaded citizens of the world out there are viewing this film as the new Game of Thrones 2.0 version, powder keg, just ripe to implode upon itself into oblivion. Nevertheless, this small dust of news has in no way deterred my continued genuine interest to see the film as a pure fan of the old franchise and to complete a small historic chapter in my life when it comes to these films that are sadly considered canon. We all indeed live in great times to see movies like this come to full completion. On that note, I lastly leave a haunting thought for all of us to ponder. Did J.J. Abrams give us all another Return of the Jedi and simply rename The Rise of Skywalker? Sincerely, Curtis J. What are your own true thoughts on this? Well, what's going to be interesting is to see how much money this movie makes, because in Hollywood, that's all anybody cares about. Now, if this movie makes more, if this movie gets to $1 billion, and I have to tell you, the audience last night seemed pretty hyped, but then again, it was an opening night at the Cinerama Theater. I mean, at the Chinese theater, so your audience was literally bought and paid for. Again, I dislike this movie a lot more or a lot less than I thought I was going to. There's a lot of moments in this movie. Again, like the prequels, there are moments throughout the movie that I really liked. But I don't think it's as terrible. I think, what's happened is I believe that I have the ability to go in and watch a movie like this, and I don't judge it. I don't prejudge it. It's that I always say to people, the movie is mine. I am the movie's to lose. So if a movie's great or if it's better than expected, I'm in. If I'm dubious about the movie going in, I give it the benefit of the doubt. The movie again, I am the movie's to lose. And I have to say, Rise of Skywalker actually got me back. Not entirely. I think it's a hot mess, but it's a hot mess that I found somewhat entertaining. I don't think I think the whole sequel trilogy was misbegotten from the start. But you can say that, but now we've had 3 movies, so it's rather than talk about what we could have had or what we should have had, we have to talk about what we got. That's the only thing we know. And I found it to be surprisingly not as annoying, and it didn't make my gums bleed as much as I thought. Willow Yang says individual videos for tips over $50. Yes. One of the things I learned from John, I just steal everything I know from John Campia. Yeah. I didn't think anybody was going to do that. But yes, what Willow is asking me is, if you want to sit down and have a one-to-one chat with me, if you want to do that, that's just a perk for that tip. I mean, people tip John that all the time. I figured I'll do that too. But yeah, so that is one of the tips. It would just, so Willow, no, but yes, that is that bad? Is that not, I don't know. I just threw that down there. But that's I know why you're asking me that. You were asking me that because John has individual videos. Yeah, I was going to do that. I was going to have like one-to-one consultations and things like that. So if people wanted me to read their scripts or listen to things, yeah, I'm going to do that. One-to-one, me and them, worldwide. There you go. So heck, why not? Why not do that? I think that'd be cool because people ask. Timbula the Spider Monkey is here and says, me looking at my Blu-ray collection. Yep, everything looks in order here, Rob. Hey, look at this new copy of Exorcist 3. Me, well, crap. Yeah, no, I have to tell you, like, I have to say, like there are having Blu-rays is annoying. Now, there's a store here in LA called Amoeba that I used to trade in, and there's other places throughout LA that I would trade in. I would upgrade my Blu-ray collection and trade stuff in. And Elizabeth is always on my ass because she's like, "Why do you have 4 copies of this movie? Like, what?" And I'm like, "Well, they're all different. I have 4 copies of To Live and Die in LA because they're different." But yes, I mean, I find myself in the case of Exorcist 3, and Exorcist 3, like, when you buy, surprisingly, the Blu-ray prices in the UK are pretty cheap. And there's been some really interesting stuff, like Second Sight put out a box set of Lee Whannell's Upgrade, or In Bruges, and they're also doing Dawn of the Dead, which I can't wait for. So yeah, But yes, Willow, I keep thinking about individual videos. You're right. But yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Timbula. But because this is a UK title and you're a Commonwealth country there in Australia, don't you get that stuff? Don't they send it to you? Because they should. But yes, I know it's annoying. Whenever they put out a new Blu-ray, I'm like, damn it. You've gotta get something for your collection. It's a bummer. Rick Berg says, remember, Pike was in command for over 10 years. That is correct. You're correct, sir. Spock served under Pike for 11 years, if memory serves. So, yes, that's why he can be burnt out. And I understand that. I totally get that. Brandon Valenzuela says, according to the Jedi, if you lose your cool, you're given into the dark side. Rey has lost her cool in every movie. It's true. It's true. Again, the writing in these movies is not up to par. I wish it were. I wish they were better written. And it bums me out. It does bum me out. I like this letter. My man Jeffrey Mao. Jeffrey Mao is here, longtime imagination connoisseur, wrote a letter that I like. This is a pretty good one. It's a long one, though. Morning, Rob. I wanted to write a letter that is probably pretty far off of the imagined connoisseur landscape, but it is somewhat topical and as it has to do what this year is and the obvious attempts to establish lists of best things about the decade that is about to end. Or is it? I will elaborate further on your correct statement that the decade does not end up until the next year, 2020. Provide some of my thoughts as to why we have this disconnect and try and tie it into something that is relevant to the Post-Geek Singularity by stating why I don't buy into or care about these decade retrospective type things. Therefore, please permit me your indulgence. Okay, for those of you who don't know what Jeffrey's talking about, I once, a couple weeks back, expressed one of my pet peeves, the fact that the decade ends, you count from 1 to 10. There was no year 0. So a lot of people talk about, we're getting our best of the decade lists. You're going from 2010 to the end of this year, when really it should be 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30. But because of numbers and the way human beings are, we don't do that. And William Bibiani even came after me on Twitter and said, come on, man. And I'm like, no, it's a pet peeve. That's why Stanley Kubrick called his movie 2001 A Space Odyssey rather than I would think, quite obvious 2000 A Space Odyssey. But the 2000 wasn't the first year of the new millennium. 2001 was. That's why he called the movie 2001. Anyway, I was annoyed by this. So that's what Jeffrey is referring to. To start with, yes, you are completely correct in that the predominant Western dating system begins with year 1. It does not begin with year 0. I'm pretty sure that most other dating systems also start with year 1 because who would start with 0? However, I think the reason why people think it starts with 0 is due to a misunderstanding of what AD means. By the way, this is not too far off from the Geek Singularity. The Post-Geek Singularity. This is so great. This is right along the lines, and I thank you for writing this letter. AD means Anno Domini, or the year of our Lord. So AD 2019 is the year of our Lord 2019. Also, AD goes in front of the year, not behind. It does not mean after death. Now, this is where you start with the confusion, because if AD did mean after death, then saying 2019 AD would mean 2019 years after death. Therefore, 1 AD would mean 1 year after death, and the year in which Jesus was born would indeed be year 0. Now, why would people think this? Because to enumerate the years before the birth of Jesus, we have the BC system. More recently, there has been the introduction of the BCE/CE nomenclature, with CE replacing AD, but it's simply a semantic change and the numbering remains the same. So sensibly but incorrectly, people assume that to the number of years after Christ's birth, it would be just the opposite for years before Christ's birth by using the difference between the year in question and the year of his birth, hence something like 500 BC, meaning 500 years before Christ. But no, that's not how it works. Because 2019 is not 2019 years after the death of Jesus Christ. Rather, it is the actual year of a period of time that started with an event. And in our case, the birth of Jesus Christ. Personally, I deal with a similar thing in that my wife, being from Taiwan, will sometimes refer to years using the Republic of China calendar. So this year is 108 for her. To see into how this kind of calendar system shows up in genre, we have the BBY ABY system in Star Wars, which, as I understand it, is actually the in-universe calendar system, which doesn't make any sense, but we should be well familiar with now with things not making sense in Star Wars. BBY ABY started in fandom, and it works fine, but it doesn't make any canonical sense in universe. Sure, the Battle of Yavin was a big deal, but wouldn't the Battle of Endor, destroying the second Death Star and killing the Emperor, or so we thought, be more significant? If we apply the Lord of the Rings age system, a new age would probably have started with the establishment of the New Republic, so numbering would start from there. I also would not be surprised if Palpatine didn't start his own calendar dating from the start of his reign. I imagine there would also have to have been a calendar starting from the establishment of the Republic, the Old Republic, and on and on. Regardless, if the decade is actually numbered from 2011 to 2020, socially and culturally, we define a decade by the number in the tens place. The 50s, the 60s, the 70s rolls off the tongue better than the 51 to 60 decade. By the way, I feel there is a bias when it comes to decade definition. We tend to focus on the decades past year 19 of a century. What do we call 2000 to 2009? The oddies? That's the aughts. 2000 to 2019 are the 11s. If we're going to establish some kind of significance to a consecutive 10-year span, then we need to be consistent, not just focus on the decades that are easier to say. Otherwise, we have to accept that simply we're focused on a socio-cultural, or let's face it, pop cultural construct as opposed to any real meaning behind a 10-year span that just happens to have the same number in the tens place. Decade definition is a very recent thing and an American thing. I don't know if the concept of the 50s, the 60s, or the 70s means the same to an Asian or an African, the same as it does to us. I don't see any need to try to lump everything that happened between 1960 and 1969 together and try and find some greater meaning, because then you get people saying, well, the 60s didn't really start until the Beatles, or it didn't really start until the JFK assassination, and it really ended with the Manson murders, or with Altamont, or with Kent State. If you start having to come up with these rationalizations, then I feel like you're just proving the point that there's nothing significant to the fact that it was just a 10-year period from 1960 to 1969. Sure, things change, and they always do. The world was a different place in 1969 than it was in 1960. But was it because of the number of the year, or was it simply that there was going to be an inevitable change? You could say similar changes occurred from 1959 to 1968, or from 1958 to 1967. For example, when it turned 2010, did we all say, well, now it's 2010. We have to really start to make sure that the 2010s have some unifying, defining thing, whatever that may be? Probably not. We weren't thinking that far. It was a new year, just like 2009 was a new year and the year before that. In the end, I think it's superficial and facile to try and tie a greater meaning to a decade, however you define it, any more than any other 10-year span. Why 10 years? It's only because of the biological quirk that we have 10 fingers. If we had 12 fingers, it would be 12 years. If we were cartoon characters, it would be 8 years. And actually, a base 8 number system would be better from a mathematical point of view. Let's delve deeper and deeper. Don't look at 10 years for the sake of it. Look at a 9-year span, or 11, or however you want to do it. Or don't look at spans of time at all. Just like people say that age is just a number, years are just a number. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Well, Jeffrey, I have to say that for whatever reason, I agree with you. 1 to 10. It's so weird. 1 to 10 sounds so clean, but when you go 11 to 20, I mean, because the 20s, when you get to 10, it's not the 10s. Where you get to 20, it's 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. With 10, it's 11, 12, 13, 4. Everything's different. So it's just wacky. I mean, I understand. I've always broken human life. I've always thought that human life is 8 decades long, if we're lucky. Tallulah, do you feel that way? 8 decades long. Because I basically feel, and I've always broken my life into decades. So 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, 31. And the Sandmen come after you and kill you when you're 30. So to me, that was the end. So there's a reason why I've always been a fan of going 21 to 30, 31 to 40. Uh-oh. Clearly, there's somebody here in the house. Oh, there's kids here. There's little kids. What can I say? I'm a little kid at heart. But yes, so there's people here. That's why they're barking. Elizabeth has clients. But anyway, I like this letter. I'm never going to change how I think about this. It always bothers me. But, people want... I understand. I get the impulse. I love lists. I love 10 best lists. When I was a kid, a book came out called The Book of Lists. I don't know if they still publish it, but it was kind of like the Guinness Book of World Records. And I loved it. As a matter of fact, my uncle, Ed Guthman, was number 3 on President Nixon's original enemies list. My uncle Ed was editor of the Los Angeles Times and was the editor-in-chief. He was the J. Jonah Jameson of both the Los Angeles Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he ended his life, he had retired, and then he became a journalism professor at USC. But he was in the Book of Lists. And I was like, wow, that's cool. So I love lists. I think everybody loves lists just because we like to compare them against ours and we want to see what's up. I'm going to do, when I have moved into the Robservatory and have more control, which I'm going to have, I'm going to do I think, top 25. I'm going to do like epically long chats where I can play video packages. And I want to go through my 25 favorite movies of the decade. I'm going to do this before the end of the year. Once I'm into the Robservatory, because I'm not going to have a whole heck of a lot to do. John Campy is going to be gone. And what I want to do for my 25 favorite movies of the decade, no, I'm not going to say the best, but my 25 favorite movies is I'm going to do a chat, but I'm going to play all the trailers. It'll be a live show, but I'm going to play the trailers on my live show, maybe talk over them, kind of like trailers from hell. But I'll talk about them, and then we can talk about them, and it'll end up being a much longer chat. But I think it'll be fun, and having that kind of technology is going to be a lot of fun too. So anyway, yeah. But I'm with you, Jeff. You know me. You know how I feel about that stuff. But yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of Robservations episode number 298. Robservations, of course, the show about something. I want to thank all of you, all members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, for continuing to support me and supporting the channel. Please hit like if you like these chats. Please subscribe. They're going to change quite soon. I can't wait to move into my new set. It's not going to be totally ready. It's going to be kind of like the Enterprise, and we're making changes as we move along, but it'll be much more interesting and more fun. You'll see Sharon Stone that has been presiding over me the whole time. I can't wait to have a desk. Well, you'll see the desk, and you'll be able to see quarter scale figures. This is going to be fun, much more visually interesting. And I'm looking forward to doing that. And Sunday is the day, kids. Sunday is going to be the day, I think, for my 300th episode. Hoping nothing goes wrong, but Sunday, I think, is going to be the day. I'm going to be on for 300 minutes, 5 hours. 5 hours, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be great. Now, I want to thank my moderators. They're not going to like that show. I want to thank the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, of course, Greg Smith, the Detective Jim, who knows if you've been naughty or nice, of course, Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu. I want to thank you guys for being moderators on this channel. What do you guys think of The Last Jedi? The Last Jedi. No, I don't want to know what you think of The Last Jedi. Tell me what you think of The Rise of Skywalker. I want to know. And we will be back tomorrow chatting. You know what? I don't know what time I'm shooting EPK stuff I'm going to shoot EPK with some of the stars of Tango Shalom in the morning. Hopefully I'll be able to be back at 1, but if I'm not, you'll know why. Anyway, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I bid you all farewell. And as always, well, may the force be with you. I don't always say that. I'm just going to say that now because, a Star Wars movie opened today. But as always, have a better day.